This is Brent Richardson, and welcome to the Business Minutia Podcast, where our focus is on the details of business that are often passed over by traditional classes and leadership training. We focus on the stories of real people who have tried, failed, and learned through their experiences and are willing to share their lessons with others. Welcome to part 2 in the Horrible Coworker series. Last one was a lot of fun to do. We're going to take on a few more this week.
And we have really appreciated the feedback we've gotten from folks on the last episode. Keep the feedback coming. That's the only way we can know if we are being effective and how we can improve.
Lots of good feedback, lots of constructive feedback. I've had folks say, don't do it that way, do it like this. And I love it. That's great. That's engaging and you're helping us get better. And I think overwhelmingly everybody says this is good stuff that people need to hear.
It's touchy stuff.
It is touchy. It is touchy stuff. We're all humans and we all got things that agitate each other, right? So let's get to it.
Let's do
Episode 2. Okay, Jamie, let's talk about unresponsive Earl or unresponsive Edith. To be clear, these are not gender traits. These are human traits. We all exhibit these kind of these traits.
Very true. Very true.
What is it about unresponsive folks that drive you crazy?
I have things to do. These guys are a roadblock for me. They are the bottleneck in the road. Until they respond, I am totally stuck. And they make me feel unimportant, unappreciated. I just need them to get their thing done. Give me
And you
information.
just don't know. Do they just not like you? Are they not responding to their email? How long do you give them before you...
Right.
Do you go by phone calls? Those are the kinds of challenges that you're up against. And when you're up against a deadline, it makes it even more challenging, right? So as we have done in the past, let me give you kind of the silver lining of what these folks, why I like these people, or why there are things about them that you need to watch for, because these can be really great folks. So
You like these people?
yeah, for sure. I have really, really great friends that I would put in this bucket or category. I at times also exhibit these traits, and so I can definitely relate to it. Often these are some of the brightest and best problem solvers. They can be some of the smartest folks some of the smartest folks I've ever worked with can fit into this category at times. These can be your mad scientists. They can be essentialists. There was a book that we had read a few years ago that you really latched on to about essentialist mindset.
Right. The idea being that if you have 100 things on your to-do list today, you're probably not going to get 100 things done. Narrow it down to the essential things.
So it could be that you're just not on their essential list and they just haven't got to it yet. It could be that you just haven't figured out how to communicate effectively with the person. Some people just aren't email folks. And this is where I want to spend some time talking, which is if your day is spent reacting to your inbox exclusively, if you're trying to get, 4-hour turn time on emails, when are you taking time to innovate anything?
Right.
When are you taking time to proactively spend time working on the things that really need to get done? You're just maintaining things. Things are just going to hold as they are. You're not going to make anything any better. You're not going to innovate or improve anything if you're just reacting all the time, right?
Right. I like to have certain times during the day that I'm looking at my texts, looking at my emails, and I always have to tell people, don't think that it's rude if you don't get a response immediately. It's just, I just can't.
Right. I think that's super important. I think we can fall victim to just reacting. The inbox, clearing your inbox, you get a certain feeling from it. You feel like you've done something. You feel
I have
like you've
never had that feeling.
You just never clear yours? I do. I like mine to be at 0. I do like that. But at the same time, I know that I've spent time maintaining my inbox at 0, and then 6 months later realize I have been spinning my wheels for 6 months and I've accomplished next to nothing.
I get
right?
that, yeah.
So these folks often are people that get that. They realize the email is not as critical as this innovation thing that I'm working on. This is not always the case. There are some people that just don't respond to messages.
Right.
But I'm just giving you some silver lining of how sometimes these folks, who they can be, and how you can see them in that way to see the value in them, right? And so how do you respond to these kinds of cases, and what do we do? And so the first thing I would ask is, are you even reaching out to the right person? Like, I've had people who send me messages and, okay, I got 100 things to do, and you didn't even, I'm not even the person responsible for what you're asking for. And you're just like, hey, can you help me with a quadratic defibrillator? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know who you are. I've never seen you before. I don't know what this is. I'll eventually get to that message, but not before all the other things that are critical. Like
Right.
the 2 emails from the vice president. That's what I'm going to work on first.
Right. I see what you're saying. So if someone is not responding, make sure that, and I mean, sometimes like I have 14 Joes, right, in my, and if I accidentally send it to the wrong Joe and they don't respond, I'm thinking that the other person is ignoring me when I may have just completely sent it to the wrong Joe.
My first year on the job in the corporate world, there was somebody that had been copied on some emails back and forth, and it was the wrong Joe. It was the wrong person that had been copied. And then they eventually responded with just this fury of email about, this is why you guys can't get your problem solved. You don't even have the right person. It was so funny. It was funny for me because I wasn't the one responsible for the mail. I felt bad for the person who'd sent it and got the wrong person. And then we all quickly were like, wow, this guy's really angry. And we went and looked him up in the system, and turns out this guy was a very high-ranking individual. And we realized, we got the wrong person. So sometimes you get the wrong Joe. Have you got the right person first? Make sure you got them. Have you addressed the person directly? On occasion, I'll get people that will send me an email, and it's like to 50 people. And then I'll catch them in the hallway like, hey, can I get a response? I don't know what you're talking about. I just literally don't have a memory of it because you whitewashed. There's no particular ownership of it. I'm not sure who you're asking.
And I'm assuming someone else can answer.
And there's 49 other people on that 50
Surely
list.
one of them answered.
One of those folks will take the bait. They've got plenty of things, plenty of free time on their time. I don't have that free time, so I just haven't got to it yet. So it's not that you're not important and that I don't like you. It's just it's not the top thing that on my to-do list this afternoon, right? So have you addressed that person directly? If you really have to have a response to them, one-on-one to them, maybe follow up with a phone call and leave them a voicemail or something like that. Then the next thing I would ask is, do you have a relationship with this person? And I keep coming back to relationship over and over. If you don't have a relationship with a person, it's going to be harder for them. It's just one more thing in their inbox, one more voicemail they've got, one more thing. They probably still think, hey, that person's probably good, and I'm going to go help them, but I just can't yet, right? So if you've got that relationship, it helps. This is something I learned from traveling to Asia for years. If I'm doing work overseas, and I want those folks to respond and help me, I can't go sit in their office. It's harder to make phone calls. So I had to find ways to make sure they knew that there's a person on the other end of the line. And so one way I would do that was put my tail on a plane and go sit with them, every year, every 6 months, whatever cadence makes sense based on the projects and things that you're doing. So that at least they would know that when I send you an email, you're going to have to stare at me in the eyes the next time I come over and explain to me why you don't respond to any of my messages. I've never had to have that conversation. Once I've made contact and built a relationship with that person, they're going to be like, okay, I remember that guy. He's coming back. I might as well try to support it, and I'll do my job, and gets a little different priority.
Right, and I also find that sometimes you don't have a relationship. So sometimes, Mike will tell me to go reach out to Sandy. So if I don't already have a relationship with Sandy, my subject line is usually, Mike sent me your way.
Yeah, and that does help. If I see something like that, I'm probably a little more prone to respond. Now, I may have to say, I appreciate that. You got the wrong guy.
Right.
This person over here is probably the best person to talk to and point you in the right direction, at least, as opposed to just getting crickets, right, which can be quite frustrating to people, right? Nothing like having a really critical deadline and you just can't get the person to answer the phone or respond in any way, and you're like, I'm struggling. I'm not sure what else to do. Then the next piece I would say is, once you've built that relationship, you got the right person. How does this person best communicate? And this is something I know that you're really good at figuring out how do people communicate most effectively.
I keep an Excel file of everyone. So I know this person likes WhatsApp. This person likes a phone call. This person likes an email followed by a text message that says, I sent you an email. Whatever it takes. And I like knowing how the person receives information more so than how I am comfortable giving it.
So that's interesting. You take the onus of responsibility of communication on you.
Right.
It's your responsibility, not the other person's necessarily. That's a little bit different depending on culture. Each culture is a little bit different, but in general, I think that's a really good strategy. I can't fault it for taking ownership, right, of communication and being able to say, okay, I know this person communicates most effectively this way, so I'm going to text them.
Right.
I know this person is best in this way. And part of it is the relationship that you have. if you just decided to text the CEO tomorrow, yeah, that might not be the best call, right?
Right.
You're probably not going to get a response. And maybe focus with somebody that you have a relationship with, or build a relationship first before you decide to go with that type of communication.
Right. And sometimes after I have asked them to do something and they've agreed to doing it, then you still have the follow-up, and you still have I always ask the person, how would you like me to follow up with you on this?
Yeah.
Do you want a reminder every Friday? Do you want me to check with you next month?
Right.
What kind of deadline do you need?
It's a good project management trick. Good program managers and project managers do this. It reminds the person that I will hold you accountable.
Yeah.
Right. I try to avoid the word, and I'd rather use the follow-up word.
Right.
Or term, as opposed to, but that's really what we're talking about. It's you're letting the person know, I'm going to follow up with you. So
because it may not be important to you.
Yeah.
It may not be on your essentials list. It is on mine, and I'm going to keep it on yours.
That might work. And so I
you
might be
check it
like,
off.
you know what? I'm really am not interested in the nags. I'm just going to get this done.
Exactly.
Depends. Now, there are cases where I may be like, you're welcome to follow up with me. I'm not, this is like number 15 on my to-do list. I'm going to get to it, but I can't promise you when.
Right. But then the question becomes, who is a better fit for this? And
Yeah.
that's an okay question to ask.
Maybe we should have started this at the beginning, but if I can do this myself, just go do it yourself. And then you don't have to wait. But sometimes we're talking about things where you've got one gatekeeper or one particular person that's the expert, and you have to go get their input. When it does get to this point, and you've tried all these things and there's nothing left, there is kind of a one last resort thing that I will go do. And again, my last resorts, I usually always give you a caution. Be careful, right? And for this one, it's just go sit in their office. If there's something that I really have to have, and this person is the last line of defense and I got to have it, I'll just go sit in their office until I get what I want. You got to be careful here because, like I said, some of these folks are really bright, sharp, mad scientist type folks. These are people you want for brainstorming sessions. When it's time to get creative and you need innovative solutions and you want to bounce ideas, these are really good people. They often really despise being micromanaged. Right? I don't like it. So if somebody come and sit in my office to do this, depending on what the task is, you can really perturb the person. You can put them off to where they just may not want to respond. It may get worse for you. It may backfire. Right? So you really want to focus on all those other items first.
So when you are trying to remind someone who is typically unresponsive of something that they have committed to doing, do you actually, like when you're emailing them, do you reply to the previous email in which they had already said they would do something?
It depends. I think it depends on the relationship. I will do that sometimes.
Right.
It is kind of a passive aggressive
It
thing
is.
to do. It's kind of like, hey, numbskull, you owe me this. And
You said you would.
so I try not to do that, but
Yeah.
I'm a softie and a little bit of a nice guy, so I probably try not to do that. Now, eventually, if it gets to the point, like I've said on the podcast before, eventually gloves got to come off and you're like,
Right.
I can't miss deadlines. This is not an option. Softie goes away. I can be your buddy, but eventually when there's stuff that needs to get done, yeah, the gloves come off. This is what needs to happen, right? And so then I might play those types. In general, what I prefer to do is a drive-by. It's hard to do that. You can't do those working from home now. It's the drive-bys become text
Right.
message, right? Or
Right.
maybe a phone call. So it's a little trickier, but my preference would be a swing by that says, hey, you going to work on that? Okay, thanks. And then I'll follow it up with some text messages. But in general, the more relationship you build with
Right.
that person, the easier that progression is and the easier you can get response from folks. But it can be annoying. But try those out. And if you've got inputs on those, we'd like to hear that too. So let's talk about Know-It-All Nate or Know-It-All Nicole. I know somebody who used to be this person.
That was me.
So Jamie is sociology, journalism, and English major. And she was the grammar police for many years in our relationship. And that's a good example of how you can annoy people pretty quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's a great person to have around when you need the person.
That's right. We'll get to that in a second. But what do you not like about these people?
Well, they kind of wear you out. They make you feel like you are always wrong, no matter what. Me being more of an introverted person, if someone is talking over me and thinks that they have all the answers all the time, it just makes me want to just be quiet. I'm not even going to try anymore.
It causes people to disengage.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're not careful, people will disengage on you.
I feel judged.
Yeah. And it just ultimately, and if you're a person out there, you want to be cautious about this because your goal is to keep engagement. What's the positives? Like to me, the silver lining for these is they're often right. That's been my experience. Not always. Let's talk about cases where people are wrong in a second, but a lot of times these know-it-all traits, these folks are usually They're usually correct. And I like knowing people who are right a lot because I like to be right. More than that, I like winning. And it's easier to win when you got people who are right and feeding you correct information. So it's good. These are good advocates to have, right? So there's a positive thing for your know-it-all trait, folks. The other part is I don't know everything, so I might learn from this person. So there's an opportunity for me to go gain something. I don't have all the answers. And if this person legitimately does, there's something I'm going to learn. I like learning stuff. So that's a positive.
And with me both being a writer and an editor, I've seen it on both sides. So someone who is writing something they want me to edit, or if I've written something that I want someone else to edit. And you get this feedback loop going back and forth where both of you think you know the right answer.
It's funny. I've sat with two know-it-alls that were both saying the same thing.
But
and
still
just
arguing.
Vehemently fighting. It's like, I don't understand why you're yelling.
We have the same common goal.
You're screaming agreements at each other. This doesn't make any rational sense. Just stop. Back up a second and think about what you're saying. Yeah. So how would we respond to our know-it-all folks? The first thing I think of when I think about know-it-alls is I think about my dad. And my dad's very funny when somebody is really adamant, passionate about something that he just really didn't care about. I could always tell because he would say, you feel real passionate about that, don't you? That was his way of saying, I don't care.
Yeah, right.
You're interested in engaging an argument that I don't want any part of, right? I will happily give you the trophy in this discussion.
Well, and I have a tendency to shut things down by saying we are going to have to agree to disagree on this. That means I don't want to talk about this anymore. I'm not changing my opinion. You're not changing yours. That may be seen as aggressive. I get that, but it stops the conversation.
And I see people do that. I guess the challenge for me is when you take that approach, oftentimes you're setting a line in the sand and saying, yeah, I will never advocate for you and you'll never advocate for me. And we're now on opposite sides of the table.
Right.
That's unnecessary.
Right.
And in reality,
for me, I see it as on this topic.
But they may not see it that
Right.
way. A lot of times people will paint it and they'll see you in this way and say, okay, this is my enemy now. And that's not the case. And
Right.
so for me, I would try to take a little bit different approach to try to maintain, first, we've talked about this before, I'll say it again, you gotta make oxygen choices. You're going to have to decide, is this really critical for me to go correct this person? This is especially the case if the person's wrong and you know they're wrong. Is it really worth you correcting a know-it-all? Does it really matter that much, right? Does that really, and oftentimes, and we'll get into this in some of the other character traits, the person is just trying to connect. They're trying to find some way to connect and share and add value to the conversation.
So what do you do when you have a know-it-all Nate when you are presenting in a group and this person they have more information than you do or they think they do?
Fantastic question. So first thing I would say is don't get into that meeting without alignment with Nate or Nicole. Your know-it-all folks, you need to have alignment with them. Anybody that you think is going to be, to know the audience in any kind of meeting like that, especially if you're presenting. You need to know the audience who you're dealing with. And if you know that there's somebody that's characterized by jumping in and chiming in and short-circuiting a meeting like that, align with them in advance. Because one of two things can happen. Would you like the person to come in and say, I have data that shows the exact opposite of this? Or would you like the person to say, you guys should listen to what he's saying because this is exactly correct? Well, obviously you want the second one. You want to try to minimize the noise.
Well, that's an ideal situation, but you don't know till you know.
Oh, yeah. I definitely have had cases where I thought I had done that, and then I still get a wild card, right?
Right.
And so cases like that, if I'm going to get a wild card, I want to use the parking lot method, which would be, hey, that sounds interesting. We looked at that data. We may have looked at it incorrectly, and it sounds like you have a lot of expertise there. Would you be willing to meet with me offline and work through that? Most of the time, people are going to be like, yeah, I'd be happy to go look through that because it's totally wrong. I said, well, let me show you the rest of our analysis, and then maybe you and I can sync up separately. I'd like to, and try to take it offline if you can.
Got it, yeah.
Some cases, I have cases where it doesn't work. Some people are just, those are usually cases where the person's out to get me and I didn't see it coming, and you just learn the hard way.
Yeah.
But line with those kinds of folks in advance prior to those meetings. You can also ask a lot of clarifying questions for folks like this. If they're consistently coming like this with, I know this, correcting you all the time. Just, oh, tell me more about that. Because a lot of times they're just trying to engage in a discussion and add some value. So you can allow them to speak and allow them to be heard. And because, like I said, you'll learn something. I learn a lot of stuff from know-it-all folks if you can have the grace and the patience to tolerate it. Now, but eventually it gets to the point where you can't, and then you need to either choose to disengage or align with them prior to, so they're not hijacking meetings and things like this.
Right. And a lot of it comes down to sometimes just maturity, because sometimes the younger folks who fresh out of school or whatever, they think they have all the answers. It's one of those that once you have all the answers, it's hard to get over the fact that you might not have all the answers.
Yeah, and I'll also take a page from the from that you'll hear people talk about, which is allowing people to save face. I've had cases where I know the person's wrong, and it's just, is it really worth me arguing with this person? What do I gain from this?
Right, you lose a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. We just in our episode last week, Rodney was just talking about this, where he had somebody share with him and say, "Hey, you're right." And what did it gain anybody? How is anything better from you correcting everyone?
Right.
So you have to make those oxygen choices and say, okay, I can correct this person, but I gain nothing from this. No one gains anything from this. And so you got to make those decisions.
Even when it's about grammar?
Yeah, especially when it's about grammar. Although, mine was, you were right every time, but it wasn't adding a whole lot of value. But I will say this, every scholarship I ever got was a result of your writing skills.
I'll take it.
So it pays to know some folks who are strong in these different areas and have the expertise.
So the one-up Wanda, one-up Wade is very similar. The negatives are very similar to the know-it-all Nate, know-it-all Nicole. I mean, they both, they wear you out, they shut you down, because it's just, why even try if no matter what I do, you've done one better or one worse?
Yeah, and these are
these
are the folks that when you say, like, here's this really awesome thing that just happened, and they follow it with, "Oh, that's nothing. This thing happened for us." And then you be like, well, and then you'll get that. And I've also tried with the same person. I'll be like, let me try the other end of the spectrum. And I'll say, well, this is terrible. We just had this happen and we just don't know what we're doing, and try a humble approach. And then they come back, "Oh, that's nothing. We had this and this and this." And it's like, okay, it's just a one-up game. Got it. Okay. And you want it to be like, you want a cookie? Yeah, yours is better. Is that what you need?
Right.
And they both wear you out. You're right. They both just are draining. Silver lining for these folks is, and I think that while they're very similar to your know-it-all cases, their intents are slightly different often. Sometimes it can be the same, but they can be a little bit different, because their intent, in my experience, is not to put somebody else down. It's just they're trying to connect. Everybody wants to connect. They want to belong. They want to have some sort of relationship with people. And so they're attempting to connect it. What you hear is, this is an example, and I'm giving paradigm examples, and I'm using quotes here. What you hear them say is, their thinking is, yeah, me too. Here's an example of my experience, and I'm relating to you.
Right.
That's what they're thinking in their head. And in reality, what comes across is, your story stinks compared to mine. And but that's not their intent, but
right.
That's how it comes across, right?
Right,
so,
exactly right.
Yeah. And so they're just attempting to establish a connection. So the intent to me is often not necessarily a bad. I don't know that I've found a person that does this where there's some ill intent. It's just the nature of them trying to connect. And oftentimes it's just from a really zealous place. They're excited. They liked your story.
They found something in common with you.
Yeah. They're like, yeah. And also, and they're
I have been looking
yeah.
for an in, and you just gave it to me, and
Yes.
now I'm going to be in the conversation.
Exactly. So how do we respond to these cases? My opinion is, I'll start soft and I'll work my way to the more aggressive. I want to let them be heard. Like, everybody wants to be heard and deserves to be heard. So I'll allow them to be heard, and I'll have as much grace as I possibly can to listen. And I know that I just have to tell myself, in their heart, this person's trying to connect, they're trying to belong, and they're trying to engage in the conversation. So I will fully engage them. I'll ask as many details as I can. As many as I can handle. Tell me more about this. Now, eventually it comes a point where you're like, all right, this is as much. I have things to do, or I just don't want to hear anymore. And
right.
My brain just can't, my ears can't take it. My ears are going to start bleeding if I have to listen to it. I just can't take it anymore. And in those cases, I will change the subject, or I'll divert to other people that are present. I'll just try to, you want to include everybody in discussion as much as you can. So I'll just switch gears, and I will try to include somebody else in discussion by just changing the subject completely. So that's one option, one thing that I will use, or one maybe a tool I'll have in the toolbox to try to deal with those cases as much as I can.
And then step 2?
I'm giving all this away, and everybody's going to be like, "Oh, I see what game you're playing." Hey, I realize I'm giving my secrets away. Part of listening to the podcast is you get this stuff for free. You're welcome, right? So
inside scoop on Brent's brain.
Scoop. That's right. I'll have to change, and I'll use new tactics now just to throw everybody a curve. And then the last step, again, the caution. Like this should not be your first step, right? But my last step is I will just professionally disengage. I'll just disengage. And, sad to say, if people are consistently like this, and we're going to get to some other cases where I'm more prone to this also, we're all different. I think our tolerance for different kinds of these traits is different. I have more tolerance for these cases because I just like a good story and I'm willing to sit and listen. But eventually I will disengage professionally. And in some cases, if it's consistently systematic like this, I may avoid the person and try to. Now, if it got really bad and I really had a really strong relationship with the person, I might confront them and say, hey, you don't have to overpower everybody's story, right? I would have to have a really strong relationship with the person. And again, you're making oxygen choices. Is it really affecting you? Is it affecting my work? Is it a roadblock that's preventing?
Right. And both for know-it-all and for the one-upper, I think both these people, they just wear me out so much that I don't value them as much as I should.
Yeah.
This becomes a roadblock to a relationship for me.
And, we've talked about this in the past, but I'll bring it up again because not everybody listens to every episode. If you can find value in people,
right.
When you can find value in every person, it makes all the stuff way more tolerable. Right now you're seeing this person in a different way. When you can't see value, when you can't find value in people, you tend to take advantage of them. Right. And I don't ever want to be a person that's trying to take advantage of people. I want to try to find value in every person. And it allows me, to tolerate a lot better. And then I start to see the value of diversity. I go, oh, man, they bring a totally different perspective. They're bringing a different perspective that I don't see. And I haven't even recognized it as valuable because all I see is my own. And I don't even see that as there's not another option. So I think that really helps.
Right.
Let's talk about Eeyore. Oh, bother. Maybe this is, we've all got some of these traits that bother us more than others. I have a hard time with this one. I should not be providing you any kind of coaching guidance for how to handle these. I'm going to tell you how I think cerebrally you should respond, but it's not necessarily what I do. But I'm preaching to myself here. I got to get better. We're going to talk about Woe is me, Whitney, or Woe is me, Walter. This is your Eeyores. If you've never seen Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, all the other characters in Winnie the Pooh are happy and they're running through the woods. Eeyores, oh, bother. And this is the person that is just draining my life source. There's just too much negativity. It's just constantly negative.
Right. And I mean, as a mom, I kind of get in fix-it mode. I want to help this person. But I also have a big soft spot for this person because, I mean, having dealt with so many people that deal with serious depression and the statistics on depression, I looked up statistics before we started this recording, and the World Health Organization estimates there are 300 million people worldwide that suffer from depression. 12.7% of adults in the U.S. are on antidepressants. I just don't take this lightly. Some of them, sure, they're just, woe is me. But some of them are dealing with something bigger than that, and they really want to be heard.
Okay, so coach me on the silver lining for this because these folks wear me out. So what is the positive? What is the value here?
I think the value of the woe is me folks is if you show them that they are valued, you will have a friend forever. You will have a follower forever. They will forever be in your debt.
Yeah, I one of my favorite books is by a guy named Bob Goff that wrote a book called Love Does. And there's a very great quote that I'm going to use here from that book where he says, most people need love and acceptance a lot more than they need advice. And so my propensities early in my career was to try to fix woe is me folks.
Right.
Try to solve yours problems. And I've learned through the years that it's best to not do that.
Right.
It's best to.
They want to be heard. They don't want to be fixed.
Yeah, I think I've had people ask like, okay, you in the past you've had to go to hospitals and be with people in other roles and just to be consoling them when I was a pastor, and how do you deal with that? And it's all presence. It's presence. You're not there to solve people's problems. I'm not a surgeon. I have no skills in those departments.
Right.
My job is not to solve anybody's problem. And I have to get better at this even as a husband. Like I'm sure you got plenty of stories like you have to tell me I'm not asking you to solve this problem.
Right.
Because my tendency is to also try to go solve people's problems. And for
we
these
do
types,
it as parents as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It just, even with the kids, it's like a lot of it is just presence. And we all, everybody goes through times of pain. Everybody goes through times of trouble. We had this great conversation with Michael Fleming here not too long ago where we were talking about a chaplain's perspective of watching, listening, and observing people in the corporate world, the struggles they go through and the effects it has on their work. And we don't talk about it. Everybody's got struggles and they've got pain and they've got those challenges. So we can all relate to needing a friend. So I can appreciate and I have to remind myself of that. At the same time, I'm not supposed to solve everybody's problems.
Right. And you talk a lot about the power of relationships, but there is really no better way to form a relationship. There's no way of knowing how strong a relationship is unless you can be the person that they come to when there is a big problem going on in their lives.
Yeah, I don't know
when they trust you with that is
it's true. It's true.
That's a serious relationship.
It's true. It's true. I've had people reach out to me and be like, hey, you have some experience with this. Can you help me? And it's non-work related. That's very meaningful.
Right.
It's very meaningful.
I'm not judging you. I'm not talking behind your back. I'm listening.
And it takes a lot of trust to ask people non-work related questions and things like that. And so I want to, those cases I'm more inclined. I'm talking about people who are just negative all the time, and those can be draining. And so the question is, how do you respond to those cases? And I think you're right. I think one element of it is recognizing and appreciating that there's depression. There's all kinds of things that people can go through, and I don't know it. And it's also not my job to fix those things. So just being present is probably the most I can do. And then again, if I have other things going on, I can't be that. Then I need to, with as much grace as possible, shift gears and go move on to what it is that I do need to do. So tell me about how to, in terms of how to respond to these folks. I need to authentically encourage them in some way,
right?
If it makes sense,
right? I mean, if they're feeling horrible about something they have messed up or feeling like just general failures, being able to compliment something that they have done. You are really great at hitting deadlines. Now, you are reliable in this area.
Yeah, it depends on what they're complaining about or what they're suffering with. When someone's lost a family member, don't go encourage them about their deadlines. It's like it needs to be proportional. That's where you really just sit. You can be present, and that's it.
Right.
There's nothing else you can do but just be present. But if it is more like I'm just, if they're just negative about some project issue or something that they're dealing with, or just had a bad review or something they're sharing with you, in those cases, you could try to encourage them with what you do recognize that but it needs to be authentic.
Right.
It needs to be authentic
right.
and connect to something that's not about their appearance or not about any other stuff like that. Make it authentically about about their soul, about who they are. And if you don't know that, sit and just be present and say nothing. Right. And most challenging of the traits that we're going to talk about are the TMI folks.
Do we have to talk about this?
I don't want to. I don't want to. This one's tough, but no, we're gonna tackle all these topics, whether they're challenging or not. We're gonna tackle them. So tell me about TMI Tom or TMI Tina.
Yeah, again, it can come from both sides. And sometimes it is the too much information about what I did this weekend, and sometimes it is too much information about the surgery you had last week. All of this is okay, stop.
Yeah, or the speakerphone Steve story that we had a couple of weeks ago from Wes was also like a TMI thing by accident. It was like, okay, it's too much information by speakerphone. I didn't need to know about that.
Right, or the lady who carried her Zoom call into the bathroom. That one went
TMI.
viral.
It's accidental TMI. That's a little bit different. We're talking about the case where folks are sitting by the water cooler. They're out having coffee, and you've got that person that just consistently shares way too much information.
And it's just hard to unhear it. It's hard to unsee it. It's just, and the same thing can happen on Facebook. People get super political. And then I don't want to have you at my house when I know that you are racist, sexist, whatever it is.
Yeah.
When the real you comes out, it's hard to unhear that.
Yeah, for years I was pretty hardcore anti-social media, and I'm still pretty cautious about who I connect with in a workplace, because like the last thing I need to see is that you're racist, right? Or some crazy thing like this. And then I see that and I go, nah, I'm going to work with you, man. I mean,
Right.
it's way better for me to not know about that. But how do we, what's the silver lining for people that are, no, to be clear, we're talking about people who are sharing TMI that are really, we're talking about stuff that makes you uncomfortable, too much information, right?
The silver lining is they're authentic.
They're authentic. And okay, who doesn't love a great story? I love a great story. And so I can be baited by these people too easily, where they're like, I'm not planning to stop and listen, but all I heard was a raccoon bit off your what? Okay, you have my attention. Continue, tell me more. Then I realized I'd been better off not hearing any of that, right? And so then what do you do about it? How do we do it? Now, I got to say, we're gonna give you a few points on this. This one, I don't have all the answers for this. We're not even going to try to solve all of this, but we have a really great story that we're going to share from a good friend this week. But we'll talk a little bit about in terms of how to respond. The first thing I would say is walk away. That's if it's depending on the nature of the conversation, you control whether you're there listening. And you control how often and whether you're around these types of folks. And in general, a couple times you realize, all right, that's who this person is. Now, if you're standing there, this is where I've had to get better. If I'm standing there listening to somebody talk crazy, when I first started, I thought, it's not me talking. Yeah, but I'm guilt by association by standing there.
Right.
I can't, I have to be careful with that too, right? So I don't need to be associated with that.
And a lot of times these guys and girls are saying the same story, right? And you know that first line they always use. Oh, yeah? Well, let me tell you about the time. And as soon as that comes out of their mouth, leave.
Yeah. So you can control that. Now, depending on the nature of what they share, you might need to let this person know that they went too far. Like I have had to do that. I've had cases where people are sharing something, and I'd be like, okay, I'm out on this. I think you're a little over the top. I'm just going to caution you. You're probably off in a territory you probably should not be sharing.
Especially in the workplace.
And then I got to go.
Yeah.
And that's a case where I'm not going to be soft. Depending how bad it is.
Right.
I have had cases where it's so bad that it goes beyond me brushing them back. Now I got to go have a conversation with them. Hey, that story was inappropriate. That's not cool, and that you're creating a work environment that's not hostile.
Right.
You're creating everybody else is uncomfortable around you now. That you're creating an environment that's making people uncomfortable. I'm talking about people making sexual innuendos and stories or inappropriate things like this. Okay, now you're creating a hostile work environment. I can't have that, and so now I got to go talk to the person about it, and I'm going to have to go talk to my human resources folks, depending on how bad or what the situation is. And if you're in doubt, go talk to somebody that you trust that you can't. Then get a second opinion on it, right?
Right.
To find out. Now you can do that. You can talk to that person either subtly or directly, depending on the nature of how bad that situation. This sounds sufficiently vague, but it's very specific to your situation and what that sounds like.
Now, do you ever go get a second opinion from someone else who heard the story? Were you offended by that?
No, I usually it's clear
enough.
I usually know if maybe I haven't been in that situation. I usually, once I know.
Yeah.
And I think a part of it is the longer you do this, and the longer you're in an environment where you see other people affected.
Right.
Because now we're talking. We've talked previously about, is it really affecting your work? Some of these things is directly affecting.
Absolutely.
You're creating a hostile work environment where you're not. We talked about the value of diversity, the value of getting different perspectives, the value that all comes from people being included in the conversation, right? Then you overlay sex and race, and you over all these different perspectives, and then on top of that, you overlay introvert and extrovert, and cultural backgrounds. You add all of these things on top of it. You've got an introvert sitting there with really great innovative ideas that's in a hostile work environment that's disengaged. Okay, now we have a problem.
Right.
Now we're not winning. I can't have that, right? So when you start to see that, you go, somebody has to say something.
Right.
And you have to have the courage to do it. So if it's that bad, you need to say something. Speaking of things being that bad, This story
It's hard to
is
listen
hard
to.
to listen to, and we're going to have Christy is going to share her story from her workplace. It's tough to listen to. I will say, like, this is not necessarily kid friendly. There's no bad language, but it is a little racy, and it just gives you an idea how some bad things that can take place in the workplace, right?
Yep. So, been in customer service well over 20 years. So you definitely have a lot of stories over the years, but one stood out. So let's paint a picture just so you can kind of get some context of how it even got to this. All throughout college, I worked at those small banks that you see inside of grocery stores. This particular situation I'm going to tell you about happened at a bank that I worked at that was inside of a Walmart, which is already kind of a crazy place to be. You've got this kind of juxtaposition of bank and money, and then like watching people shop at Walmart. It's already a lot to wrap your mind around, but when you're in college like I was, you just kind of roll with it. And also in these small banks, you get really close with the staff because you are all wearing multiple hats. You're doing everything that a full service bank would do, but you're doing it in a smaller environment with less people. So I was a supervisor, but I also was a teller when our lines would get long. And I had a manager who was also, running the overall bank operations, and even they would jump on the teller line when needed. So it's fast paced, but you're building a lot of camaraderie. And when you're working in a bank, everything's under dual control. It's a standard phrase used in banking. Everything takes two people, 2 keys to open the vault, 2 people to service ATMs, 2 people to sign off on certain transactions. So you're physically working closely with people, and you get emotionally close with people. You get robbed together. I mean, these things happen. So here's where things start to go south. My horrible coworker was also my manager, which makes things tricky. Even though I was a supervisor in the hierarchy of things, he was still above me. So there was that degree of respect and maybe intimidation. So as we're doing all of these things in dual custody, spending lots of time together, and sometimes there's more than one of us in the area, it wasn't just me, he starts telling us about his weekly massages. Fair enough, you get massages, but they weren't just any massages. They were happy ending massages. I didn't even know what those were. I was 20. I had barely had a boyfriend. And he started going into graphic detail. We would be auditing paperwork and counting money. And he would tell me all about his fornications at the newest illegal massage parlor, which that's a whole other thing. These are like in hometowns all over the US. But he would go on and on about, oh, I found this new one. And this girl did this. And for the right price, they'll do whatever you want. Wow. I learned so much about the illegal sex trade. It was distressing as a woman to hear about this, really as a human to know that this stuff is happening. But I never said anything to him. It bothered me, but I was young and I was intimidated.
Yeah, sure.
And then the thing I do want to say, the caveat in all this is because I know it'd be easy to go like, oh, sexual harassment. He never, ever directly he never made unwanted advances at any of us. He really did. Even though some of the things he did were so deplorable and disrespectful toward women, he was respectful toward us when it came to like our actual work. He never sexually harassed us. He said very disturbing, distressing things about other people. But to me personally, and to my other female coworkers, he never ever made comments about us directly, which made it so tricky. And we had a really small HR department. It was such a small company. There was, of course, always fear of retaliation. So I just kind of sat with all of that knowledge. I, silently judged him and knew I would never trust him or want to work for him in the long haul.
Yeah.
It was just so unprofessional. And even when you're close in a work environment, there's that fine line that you really need to be careful to not cross.
So what would you do? So your daughter is in the same situation. What are you going to tell her?
So the first thing I think is really important that some people forget to do, because some people just like to jump to I'm going straight to HR. You ask the person directly to stop. I think you can start very kindly and subtly and be like, hey, let's not talk about that at work. Or go straight to, what? I'm not comfortable hearing about that. Let's keep our private lives private, because sometimes the people don't know. They think it's wanted. And if you don't tell them, sometimes silence in a way is to some people, it's like you're saying, okay, even if you're not, they don't know better. So I would say you go to that person first. If it doesn't stop, then let's start exploring our other options.
So yeah, that story is really hard to listen to. I can't even relate to that, but I know that kind of stuff happens all the time. My first job out of school, it was very clear that there was a manager that was having an affair with a report. I mean, very, very clear. And no one said anything for the same reason, fear of retaliation. I get it. That is such a hard place for anybody to be in.
It's painful to hear. I'm fortunate that I've not directly been involved in anything like that. It's just hard to listen to. We sit here and we sound like we got all the answers. I ain't going to touch trying to tell you what the right answer to this is. I'm really appreciative that Chrissy was willing to share and to share how she would handle it today for her own daughter. But I'm not gonna propose solutions to this one. I'm going to leave this one open-ended. I really would like to hear from people. I want to hear what you think. How would you recommend that Christy had? How would you have approached it? How would you approach it today? That's craziness, right? It's unacceptable.
Well, it's difficult even being that young and not having the work experience or anything. You shouldn't have to deal with stuff like this.
Right.
You shouldn't have to.
You shouldn't have to anywhere. You certainly shouldn't have to deal with that in the workplace.
No.
Where it's supposed to be a safe place for you to be thinking and doing your job and not have, you talk about hostile work environment. That's a really classic example. It's crazy. So like to hear from people in terms of how would you recommend? What's your thoughts on how to approach that particular kind of scenario?
We have a Facebook group that's called Business Minutia Discussion. You can post there. You can also send us an email.
We're on social media everywhere. You can go find wherever you actively engage. Go add some comments or shoot us a message. Right there. Okay, this has been part 2 in our series on horrible coworkers. Hope this is helpful, covering unresponsive folks, know-it-alls, one-up folks, and hopefully you see, by now between the first 2 episodes, we're all exhibit some qualities like this. Maybe not the last one there, I sure hope, with Christy's story, but I think hopefully you recognize the humanity in everybody and see, okay, a little more grace might go a long way. And then when it is affecting your work, you're making oxygen choices and what makes sense in terms of which one do I need to go address.
Yeah, I think this has been a great series so far.
So far, we got more to cover, but hope this is helpful. Really appreciate everybody listening.